When upgrading a Nintex for Office 365 workflow that uses the for each action, there may be some reconfiguration you will need to perform to make the looping work depending on how your collections are built. In my workflow example here, I'm performing a simple looping scenario that iterates through a list of cars using a collection variable that comes from a SharePoint query list action, and it totals up the values of all the cars using a currency column from SharePoint. I have already upgraded this workflow, so let's flip over to my Nintex Workflow Cloud environment to see what it looks like. Remember, as you upgrade your workflows, you can review the Workflow Upgrade Details panel to get more information on what needs to be done to get your workflow functioning. In this example, we need to double check our connections to SharePoint. We also need to review the query list action along with the for each looping action. The loop for each action does come over with the same properties and format as it had in Office 365. And this may work for you right away based on your collection variable being manually created. However, in my scenario, the collection was originally created using the query list action above when it lived in Nintex for Office 365. In Nintex Workflow Cloud, this action uses a newer way to help you work with data called object variables. From a high level, you can think of an object as a variable that groups several related variables of any type into a hierarchical structure. It is created when you query a data source like a SharePoint list or maybe a SQL Server database. The results of that query can be stored using an object variable, where that variable may contain multiple collections of information, and it may also contain other variables like number of items returned. To get this working, I'm going to need to recreate the output result variable in my query list action so that it uses an object variable. Then we can feed that into the loop for each action below it. I'll do this by adding a new object variable down in the output property. I'll go ahead and name this myCarsObject just for context. Notice that the only variable option here is actually of type object. I'll click Create and Insert to add that variable down below. I'll also need to set the SharePoint connection to fix that issue with this action, as well as do that up in the Start event. Those actions look good. Now let's look at the for each action. As you can see, this now becomes the loop for each action in Nintex Workflow Cloud, and there is a blue information message that talks about using the new version of this action on the design canvas. I need to do this actually because we don't have the original collection coming directly from the query list action anymore. I will grab the new version of the loop for each action from the actions list on the left side of the page and drag it over just above the existing action. I want to set the target collection here to the list of items that comes back from my SharePoint list query, but it's currently living inside the new object variable I just created. So let's open the Insert Variables panel by clicking on the plus icon. We can select SharePoint Online from the left, and notice that the myCarsObject object variable appears. If we select that variable, we get a nice look at the hierarchical structure of that object. It contains a collection of item IDs that were returned from the query, a collection of the actual items from the SharePoint list, and another object reference to the first item returned. I want to target the items collection in this workflow, so I'll click the Insert button for that. I'm not concerned with the stop processing variable here because I want to actually loop through every item to get the dollar value of a vehicle. But make a note, that works the same way as it did in Nintex for Office 365. So at this point, let's go back to the design canvas. From here, I just need to move up the do calculation action into my new loop for each grouping, and then delete the old for each action. If you remember, in Nintex for Office 365, you had to specify which columns you wanted to pull out of your SharePoint list. Then work through either separate collections for each of those columns or parse through strings from a single collection to get to the values you wanted. In Nintex Workflow Cloud, we actually can zero in on the exact columns or fields we want without those extra steps inside the context of our loop. I want the value column for this calculation, so if I click on the insert icon, I can select the loop for each option to open up variables that come out of the target collection there. With each loop, I can now get to the current item the loop is on and select a specified field to process. I'm going to drill in and select the value field and replace it over in the calculation properties. From here, I can publish my workflow and it should work as designed.